I came home from 9 months overseas, walked into my mother's kitchen, and saw what my own brother had done to her face. And 20 minutes later, there was a sheriff's sergeant standing in that driveway, with her hand on my chest, begging me to listen to her. And the reason why is the part nobody believes when I tell it. Hey, real quick, I'm glad you found this. I mean that. And I hope, wherever you are right now, you're somewhere warm. Do one thing for me while you're sitting there. Put your city in the comments. Doesn't matter if it's a town with one stoplight. I read every one of them. I'll say your name out loud in the next one. That's a promise. And if you can spare a like and a subscribe on your way out, that's the whole engine on a channel this size. All right. Okay. So, my name's Wes. I'm 34. At the time this happened, I was a staff sergeant, and I'd just come off 9 months over in Syria and Iraq, the kind of deployment where nothing happens for 6 weeks, and then everything happens in one Tuesday. We flew back into Fort Campbell in the middle of the night in October, and I did the whole thing. The buses, the hangar, the families with the signs. And then I signed out on leave the next morning and got in my truck and drove north on I-65 and then over on 75, 4 hours, up to Dayton, Ohio, where I'm from. Riverside, technically. The east side, out past the base fence line at Wright Pat. I didn't call ahead. That was the whole plan. I'd been telling my mom for weeks I wasn't going to make it home till Thanksgiving, and I had this whole stupid picture in my head of walking in the back door and her dropping whatever she was holding. She did drop something, actually. A coffee mug. It broke on the linoleum, but not for the reason I wanted. She was standing at the sink with her back to me, and when she turned around, the left side of her face was the color of an eggplant. Her eye was swollen down to a slit. There was a butterfly bandage over her eyebrow that somebody had put on crooked, and her bottom lip had a split in it that had scabbed and cracked open again, and she had her hair pulled forward over that side like a curtain, like a 62-year-old woman was going to hide that with hair. And I want you to understand something about my mother. Darlene, 5'1", worked 26 years at the same place, a supplier shop off Route 4 making seals and gaskets, and she'd come home with her hands smelling like machine oil, and she'd still make dinner. She kept a plastic tub of Halloween candy in the hall closet year-round for the neighbor kids. That's who we're talking about. She looked at me, and her one good eye filled up, and she said, "Oh, honey, you weren't supposed to see me like this." Not, "You're home." Not, "Oh my God, Wes, you weren't supposed to see me like this." And I want to tell you I said something noble. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the doorway with my bag still on my shoulder, feeling my hands go cold. And I asked her who, and she wouldn't answer. And I asked her again, and she looked at the floor. And that's when I already knew, because there's only one person on this earth she'd cover for like that. My brother. Cole. And here's the part where it gets bad, because Cole's truck was in the driveway. He was upstairs. He was asleep upstairs in my old bedroom at 2 in the afternoon, while she stood down there in the kitchen, with her face caved in, making a fresh pot of coffee for him. I remember setting my bag down, real gentle, which is funny to me now, how careful I was with a duffel bag. I went up those stairs, Mom's yelling behind me, "Wes, Wesley, don't." And I got to the door and I put my boot through it. And Cole comes up off the mattress like a man who's been waiting 9 months to get caught. And he's got his hands up already. And he's going, hey, it's not what she said. She fell. She's been drinking. She's been off her pills." And I had him by the throat against the closet door before he finished the sentence. I'm not proud of that. I'm not going to sit here and dress it up. I had my brother against a door, and my whole arm was shaking. And there was a sound coming out of me that I didn't recognize. And what stopped me wasn't him. He was already crying. What stopped me was my mother screaming from the bottom of the stairs in a voice I'd never heard out of her in my life. So I let go. I dropped him, and I walked out, And I sat on the tailgate of my truck in the driveway in October, with my heart going like a bird in a box. And about 4 minutes later, Cole came out the front door with a phone to his ear, walking backward down the porch steps, yelling into it that his brother just came home from the army and assaulted him, and he's scared for his life. And he was looking right at me while he said it. And I swear to you, he was smiling. 20 minutes, that's how long it took. And that's where this story actually starts, because everything I thought was about to happen in that driveway did not happen. 2 cruisers, Montgomery County Sheriff, and they rolled up slow, no lights, which should have been my first hint. And a sergeant gets out of the first one. Little woman, maybe 5'4", gray coming in at the temples. Name tape said Boyd. And Cole's already walking at her, going, "That's him, that's him." Right there. He choked me. Look at my neck. And she doesn't even look at him. She holds up one hand at him without turning her head. And she says, "Sir, go stand by the porch." And then she comes up to me at the tailgate. And she looks at my truck. Kentucky plates, Fort Campbell base decal in the corner of the windshield. And she looks at my hands. And my hands are shaking. And she says, "You just get back," I said yesterday. She nodded like that answered about 9 questions. And then she did something I still think about. She put her hand flat on my chest, just laid it there, like you'd steady a door that's about to swing. And she leaned in and she said, real quiet, so quiet Cole couldn't hear it from the porch. She said, "Sergeant, I need you to listen to me for 60 seconds, and I need you to not say a word while I do it." I said, "Okay." She said, "I know who you are. I know who your mother is, and I have been sitting on your brother for 4 months." I said, "What?" She said, "If you put hands on that man again tonight, and I mean if you flick him on the ear, I have to take you. Not because I want to, because that's the law, and because that is exactly what he wants. And the second you're the defendant in this, he's the victim in this. And 4 months of my work goes in the trash, and your mom's the one who pays for it. So I'm asking you. I'm not ordering you. I'm asking you. Please, let me do my job." You ever have somebody hand you a whole new world in about 11 seconds? Because I had spent that entire drive up from Kentucky thinking about deer season with my brother, and whether Mom still had the good chili recipe on the index card. And now I'm standing in the driveway I learned to ride a bike in, and a cop I'd never met in my life is begging me to be smart. I said, 4 months? And she said, 4 months. And then she said, "When's the last time you looked at your mother's bank account?" That right there. That question. That's the one that took the floor out from under me, and I want you to sit with it for a second, because I sure had to. All right, let me back up. You need to know who Cole is. Cole's 2 years younger than me, and I want to be fair to him, or as fair as I can be. So here it is. Our dad died when I was 19, and Cole was 17. Heart attack in the parking lot of the Kroger on Woodman. He was 48. Big guy, drove a route for a beverage distributor, taught us both to fish out at Eastwood Metro Park. And he was a hard man, but he was ours. And one Saturday, he was just gone. I dealt with it by enlisting 11 weeks later. That's the honest truth. I signed the papers because I could not stand being in that house. Cole dealt with it by never leaving that house. He was 22, still there. 25, still there. 30, still there. And every year there was a reason. And every year, the reason got a little thinner. He was between jobs. He was starting a thing with a buddy, gonna do pressure washing, gonna do driveway sealing, gonna flip cars. He had a girlfriend for a while, Crystal. Worked as an aide at one of those assisted living places out in Huber Heights. And she'd be there half the week, and I'd come home on leave, and there'd be a new TV in the living room, and a jet ski in the garage that never touched water. And Mom would say, "He's helping me out around here." He mows. He takes me to my appointments. He mows. That's what a 62-year-old woman traded her retirement for. He mows. And me? I'm 4 states away. I'm sending her money and calling on Sundays and telling myself that as long as somebody's in that house with her, she's not alone. And honestly, if I'm being real with you, a part of me was relieved. Because if Cole's there, I don't have to be. That's a thing I've had to make my peace with, and I'm still working on it. So, Sergeant Boyd, driveway. She tells me to go inside, get my mom's mail, and meet her at a Waffle House on Woodman at 9 that night after her shift, and to not say one word to Cole about any of it. Hardest thing I've ever done, and I've done some things. I went back in that house, and I ate dinner across the table from the man who broke my mother's face, and I passed him the salt. That night at Waffle House, she's got a folder. Not a case file, just a manila folder, because as she put it, she wasn't officially supposed to be showing me a thing. Adult Protective Services got a referral in June. Anonymous. Turned out later it was Roy Kessler, the Vietnam vet across the street who'd been watching my mother's driveway for 20 years and finally called somebody. The referral said an adult son was isolating a woman, showing up at her bank, hollering at her in the yard. APS opened it. APS went out. My mother told them everything was fine. They kept a file open anyway, and it kicked over to the sheriff's economic crimes side, and Boyd started pulling paper. And what she had in that folder was this. March of that year, 4 weeks after I flew out, my mother signed a durable power of attorney, naming Cole as her attorney in fact. I said, no, she didn't. I said, Mom wouldn't do that. She doesn't even let him drive her car. Boyd slid it across the table. There was Mom's signature, and there was a notary stamp on it, a guy named Dwayne, out of a title office in Trotwood. And Boyd tapped the stamp with her pen, and she said, that's the loose brick. From March to October, $61,400 had come out of my mother's accounts, her Wright Pat credit union savings, which was her whole life, 26 years of overtime. Her dad's inheritance from when Grandpa Ray died. And the beauty of a power of attorney, if you're a person like my brother, is that none of it is technically stealing on paper. He didn't forge a check. He walked into a credit union with a document that said he was allowed. And he was allowed. $15,000 on a boat, $9,000 on a motorcycle, $22,000 across 17 months of what looked like cash withdrawals in the $200 to $800 range, which Boyd said, in her experience, is not a boat. That's a habit. And then there was the last page, and this is the one that made me put my hands on the edge of that table. In September, 3 weeks before I came home, somebody had a quitclaim deed drawn up, transferring my mother's house on Woodhaven, the house my dad bought in 1992, the house he died owning, out of her name and into Cole's. It hadn't been recorded yet. It was drafted and sitting there, and Boyd said, that's what the face is about. I said, what? She said, Sergeant. Elder financial exploitation doesn't turn violent over money. It turns violent when they say no. Your mother said no to something, recently. And she looked at me and she said, my guess is she said no on the 11th of October, because that's the date on that draft. You want to know the worst part of the whole night? It's not the $61,000. It's that I sat in a Waffle House at 11 at night doing math and realized my mother had taken a beating specifically to keep my father's house. And then she stood at her sink and told me she wasn't supposed to be seen like that. She took it for us, and she was embarrassed about it. I'm gonna move on, because I can't sit in that. Okay, so here's where it gets bad. And I mean actually bad, because I went in thinking this was a straight line. Cops know. Cops arrest him. Done. It was not a straight line. It fell apart 3 separate times, and I want to walk you through every one of them. Failure number 1. My mother. Boyd needed her statement. That's it. Just a statement on the felonious assault so they could charge it and hold him, because they weren't ready on the financial side yet. I sat my mom down at that same kitchen table 2 days later. I'd taken the mirror off the wall in the hallway, which sounds insane, but she'd been covering it with a dish towel and I couldn't stand it. And I said, "Mom, Boyd's coming at 4. All you have to do is say what happened." And she said no. Just no. Flat. I said, "Ma, look at your face." And she said, "And if I say it, what happens to him?" "He goes to prison, Wesley. He's 32 years old." "What comes out the other end of that?" I said, "He's already what comes out of it." And she put her hand over mine, and she said, the thing that I still, to this day, don't fully know how to hold. She said, "You got out." He didn't. I let that happen. She blamed herself. My mother, with a split lip, sat there and did a moral inventory and came out the villain. Boyd came at 4. My mother told her she fell down the basement stairs carrying a laundry basket. And Boyd, God bless this woman, Boyd didn't push. She just wrote it down. And out in the driveway she told me, "That's normal. That's not the end. Happens more than it doesn't. We keep going." Failure number 2, and this is the one that nearly ended me. 10 days later, I got a phone call from my first sergeant. Cole had gone down to the Montgomery County Courthouse on West 3rd and filed for a civil protection order against me. Petition said I was an unstable combat veteran who had assaulted him in his home, that he feared for his safety, that I had access to firearms. And listen, some of that was true. That's what made it work. I did put him against a door. I do have firearms, my dad's, in a safe. But he didn't stop at the courthouse. He called Fort Campbell. He got somebody's voicemail in my chain of command and left a message that his brother came back from Syria different and was violent and had threatened to kill him. You know what that does to a career? A protection order against a soldier means no firearms. No firearms means I can't do my job. It's an inspector general referral. It's a look at my clearance. It's the whole thing. 16 years, 2 combat deployments, and my little brother is going to take it off me with a form he filled out in pen at a counter. And I remember standing in Mom's backyard on the phone with my first sergeant, this old warhorse named Ruiz, and I told him the whole thing start to finish. And there was this long silence, and he said, "Wes, get a lawyer today, not tomorrow, and do not go near that man. Do not text that man. If he's in a Kroger, you leave the Kroger. Ex parte hearing. Full hearing set 14 days out. That's 14 days of my whole life sitting in a folder. I got a lawyer out of Kettering, woman named Priya Raman, and I brought her everything. And she looked at Cole's petition for about 90 seconds and she said, 'Huh.' And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, he wrote too much. Because in the petition Cole had written, in his own handwriting, that he was afraid I'd hurt him over, quote, a disagreement about our mother's finances that he was legally authorized to handle. He put it in writing. He put the motive in writing at a courthouse counter to make himself look reasonable. Priya said, he just told a judge he's been handling her money. Now we get to ask him how. Failure number 3 came before we ever got to that hearing, and it's the one nobody saw coming. The notary, Dwayne. Boyd's whole case leaned on that power of attorney being bad, because if it's good, Cole's a jerk who spent his mom's money with permission, and that's a family problem, not a felony. So Boyd goes and sits down with Dwayne at the title office in Trotwood, and Dwayne says yes, absolutely. Darlene came in. I remember her. Nice lady. Except my mother had never been to Trotwood in her life. And when Boyd asked Dwayne to produce his notary journal, the book where you log every signing, Dwayne got a lawyer that afternoon and stopped talking. And that was 3 weeks of nothing. Dead. Boyd told me straight. If he holds, we might not get past it. You know what broke it? A gun. Not like that. Relax. My dad had a Remington 870, a shotgun. Ugly old thing, duct tape on the stock. And when I was home, I went to the safe to clean it out and it wasn't there. Neither was Dad's wedding band, which Mom kept in a jewelry box on her dresser, wrapped in a piece of tissue. Now, I couldn't go near Cole. Protection order. So I did the thing you do in Dayton, which is you drive around to every pawn shop on Springfield Street and Salem Avenue with a photo. And on the fourth one, a place off North Main, a kid behind the counter goes, "Yeah, hang on. Ohio pawn shops have to log every transaction with the police. Seller ID, thumbprint, everything. Electronic. That kid printed me a receipt with my brother's driver's license number on it, and my father's wedding band described as, and I'm quoting, "One man's yellow gold band, worn, $80. $80. He sold our dad's wedding ring for $80. And here's why it mattered. And this is the thing Priya spotted before I did. Look at the date. Cole pawned that ring in April. April is 1 month after he supposedly got a power of attorney that gave him access to $61,000. Why does a man with a POA and a fat account pawn a ring for $80? Priya said. Because that's not a man managing his mother's money. That's a man who needed $80 at 9 in the morning. Boyd took that receipt and went back at Dwayne's lawyer with it. And she brought something else, too. Turns out Crystal, the girlfriend, the aide, had a notary commission of her own from her job at the assisted living. And Dwayne's title office had done 2 closings that year with Crystal's employer. That's all it took. Boyd sat down with Crystal in an interview room and told her that a state-tested nurse aide who participates in the financial exploitation of an elder is looking at her license, her job, and a felony, and Crystal folded in about 9 minutes. She'd walked the POA over to Dwayne herself, signature already on it. Dwayne stamped it as a favor to a business contact and never laid eyes on my mother. Now the alarm goes off. The full hearing on the protection order was on a Tuesday morning in November. 2nd floor, Montgomery County. One of those courtrooms with the fluorescent lights that make everybody look sick. Cole came in a suit. First time I'd seen him in a suit since Dad's funeral. And he did the whole performance. He rubbed his neck when the judge looked at him. He said, "Sir, a lot." And Priya got up and asked him 9 questions. 9. She said, "Mister, you wrote in your petition that you were legally authorized to handle your mother's finances. Is that right?" "Yes, ma'am. Authorized by what document?" "A power of attorney." "And who witnessed your mother sign it?" And I watched my brother's face do something I'd never seen it do. It went blank, like a screen turning off, because he suddenly understood he was standing under oath in a courtroom on the record, and every answer he gave was a brick in a wall he was building around himself. He said, "I'd have to check," Priya said. "Was Crystal there?" And I watched his jaw move. The judge denied his petition in about 4 minutes, said the evidence didn't support it, said the petitioner's testimony had, quote, credibility issues. But that's not the part. The part is what was waiting in the hallway. Because Boyd had timed it. She'd had the indictment for 6 days, and she sat on it so it would land right there. We came out of that courtroom into the hall, and there's Boyd against the wall with 2 deputies. And she pushed off the wall real casual, and she said, "Cole." And he actually said, hey, like she was somebody he knew. Felonious assault, theft from a person in a protected class, forgery, tampering with records. 2 more I can't remember. And they turned him around and put him against that wall in his suit, and he started yelling for our mother. Not for a lawyer, for Mom. And she was sitting on the bench in that hallway with her purse in her lap, and her face still yellow-green from the fading, and she did not get up. That was the first time in my brother's life a room didn't move for him. Crystal, since you're going to ask, Crystal got a diversion deal for cooperating, no prison, but that's not nothing, because she had to sit in front of the Ohio Board of Nursing at a hearing, and I went, because I wanted to hear it out loud, and I watched a panel of women in cardigans revoke her aid certification permanently, while she cried into a wad of tissue. She'd worked with old people for 11 years. That's the job she can never have again, anywhere in this state, for the rest of her life, over a stamp. And then there's Aunt Janine, my dad's sister, who had spent the whole fall telling everybody in the family, on Facebook, at the funeral home when somebody's husband died, that I'd come back from overseas with problems, and I was tearing this family apart over money, and Cole was just trying to help his mother. She showed up at Mom's house at Thanksgiving, just walked in like always, put a green bean casserole on the counter, and my mother, 5'1", dish towel over her shoulder, said, "Janine." And Janine said, "Oh, don't start." And Mom said, "You told people I fell." Janine said, "Well, that's what you said, Darlene." And my mother said, "Yes." And you were happy about it. You want to take that casserole with you, or you want me to throw it out? Janine stood there for a second, waiting for somebody in that kitchen to save her. Nobody moved. Roy Kessler was standing by the stove with a beer, and he just looked at the ceiling. And she picked her casserole back up off the counter, and she left, and the storm door banged, and my mother turned around and said, "Who wants dark meat? I nearly went through the floor." Okay, the house. You remember that quitclaim deed sitting in a drawer? Here's the thing nobody knew. Not me, not Boyd, and definitely not Cole. On October 11th, the day my mother said no, she didn't just say no. She drove herself to a lawyer's office in Oakwood, an old estate guy named Halverson, who'd done my dad's will in '99, and she put the house on Woodhaven into a revocable trust with a professional trustee. Alone. 62 years old, terrified, and she went and did it by herself and told nobody, and then she went home and made dinner, and 2 days later, he broke her face over it. That's my mother. That's who she is. She let me think for 2 months that she was too scared to act, and the whole time she'd already done the one thing that mattered. Cole found out at the sentencing. Priya and Halverson made sure of it, because part of the restitution order tied to the property, and Halverson stood up and put it on the record, and I was watching my brother's face when he heard it. He was in the orange. He'd lost weight, and he turned his head and looked for the house he thought he already owned, and it wasn't there, and it was never going to be there. He took a plea. Common Pleas, Montgomery County. 5 years. He'll do around 3.5. He went down to the reception center in Orient in February. He wrote my mother 11 letters. She's read every one of them. She keeps them in a drawer in the kitchen with the rubber bands and the takeout menus, and she hasn't answered one yet. And when I ask her about it, she says, "I will when I'm ready to mean it." I don't have that in me. I really don't. She's a better person than me, and it's not close. The protection order thing cleared off my record. Ruiz went to bat for me, and the IG referral got closed with nothing in it. My clearance held. Here's what I remember most, though, and it's not the courtroom. It's a Saturday in March. I was back on leave. 60 degrees, that first fake spring day Ohio gives you before it snows again. And my mother was out in the front yard on Woodhaven in Dad's old barn coat, digging up the bed along the porch, and she had the radio going in the garage on that oldies station, and Roy hollered something at her from across the street, and she hollered something back, and I was standing in the driveway. Same driveway. And her face was just her face. That's it. That's the whole thing. There was nothing on it. No yellow, no green, no butterfly bandage, no hair pulled forward. Just my mom, squinting, with dirt on her knees, 63 years old now, mad at a root. And I let out a breath that I think I'd been holding since October, and my shoulders came down about 2 inches, and I had to go sit in my truck for a minute. The house is still hers. The trust holds it. When she's gone, it comes to me, and actually, half of it comes to Cole, because she wouldn't do it any other way, and I stopped arguing about it. I still think about Sergeant Boyd's hand on my chest, 20 minutes off a driveway from being the guy in the orange myself. 20 minutes. So here's what I'd tell you, and then I'll let you go. When somebody's hurting somebody you love, everything in you says, go now, go fast, go hard. And I get it. But the loudest thing you can do is almost never the thing that works. My brother wanted me to swing. He had it all set up. The one move he never planned for was me sitting down on a tailgate and shutting my mouth and letting the slow, boring paperwork people do what they do. And the other thing, call your mother. Not the Sunday call where you both say fine. Ask her the ugly question. Ask her about the money. Ask her who's in the house. Because mine was standing at that sink telling me she wasn't supposed to be seen. And she'd been standing there a long, long time before I ever thought to look.